Hey guys, so welcome to the show. This week I'm speaking with Martin Refalo. So it sort of rolls in a weird way. So it's kind of it goes straight into it really. However, I didn't really do an intro as we did do a lot of talking before, but we decided to just leave this bit in, and as it was sort of all over the place. You may potentially hear that stuff at the end. Still figuring out what to keep in, what to keep out. But yeah, there will probably be some bits at the end that are sort of random topics. We had a few nice little discussions around some really unique, sort of nuanced things that I don't think I've really heard talked about that much. So if you'd like to hear that sort of stuff, I'll leave it in the timestamps in the description. You can see the sort of topics we talked about. I'll outline them there. But generally what we're talking about here is just sort of how to be a healthy physique competitor, how to recover from your season, how to, one, get there, but then also once you're there, what the fuck do you do after? Because bodybuilding is quite a treacherous sport in some ways, I would say. You can easily develop eating disorders, you can easily put yourself in a precarious position. So that's sort of what we went over here. It's a really, really good conversation, I think a really useful one. If you've just finished your season, I hope you enjoy this and heed Martin's advice, as he's a very knowledgeable lad from JPS Health and Fitness. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. If you'd like to find Martin, you can find all his links in the description. You can find coaching with Martin, or you can look at JPS's general content, or you can also follow Martin on his Instagram at Mr. Fitness. Some of you may remember I started a petition where Lyndon Purcell changed his name. Now I think it might be a good idea to try and get Martin to change his, although I'm not quite sure that he'll budge. But if you also agree that Martin should change his Instagram name to something a little more professional, I think this is a really worthy cause, something that we really need to focus our efforts on. So if you do want to help me in this holy crusade, some would say, some might say it's minutia that doesn't matter, but yeah. If you would like to help me do that, send Martin a message saying, please change your name, Martin. But yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the podcast. Well, that's actually what I got you on to talk about was sort of, and this is sort of actually the second topic down, but I think we'll jump into it. In terms of for a contest prep, what are some of the psychological considerations that you sort of like to keep in mind? Because it's the kind of thing where I look at a contest prep and I think, holy shit, if someone was neurotic as fuck, and I think if one, I didn't have enough muscle back then, but say if 2 years ago, I went into a contest prep, I would have become a fucking psycho. Just said, fuck having friends. I would have just been like, I don't need friends, don't need family, don't need anything. I'm just going to fucking grind and eat no food.
Yeah, well, you'll be surprised. There's so many competitors out there who still adopt that type of a mindset. To begin, I don't think personal success in bodybuilding should be defined by the outcome on the day. And that's probably something that you have to get your head around before entering the prep. The individuals who are heavily focused on the outcome and kind of disregard all the other aspects that should influence their success tend to be the ones who end up being, who are at risk of being heavily disappointed and potentially perceiving the prep as a failure when in fact it wasn't. You think about the high degree of unpredictability and subjectivity that comes along with bodybuilding. Just being heavily outcome focused, I think, is, especially for a first-time competitor, as you progress through your bodybuilding career and you start competing for more prestigious titles, the outcome itself obviously starts to rise in its influence to your success. That, as a first-time competitor, I think the focus needs to be on enjoying the process, more importantly, enjoying the day, making sure you learn from the process and kind of getting your head around how hard the prep actually is, because bodybuilding is a long-term sport. And if you want to do really good in bodybuilding, if you don't want it to be just a hobby, if you want to push it a little harder, then you're probably going to need to compete more than once, right? As I said, for the first time, you're just getting a feel of the whole process. And the individuals who don't enjoy the process, the ones who are heavily outcome focused and they get disappointed by their results, and they potentially let bodybuilding break them are the ones who never return. And that's disappointing to see, because some people have potential, but if you get broken from bodybuilding, if you have a bad experience, you're not likely to step back on stage. And this is why I kind of emphasize with my clients, I emphasize reflection, like reflecting on the process. Like, how far have you come independent of accolades that you potentially will win on the day, or potentially you won't win? Like, it's important to consider these aspects that are independent of the gold medal. So, for example, how much have you progressed throughout the prep? Not only from a physical standpoint, like, yeah, you definitely should have progressed from a physical standpoint. You're trying to lose body fat and maintain muscle mass. But what about a psychological standpoint? Like, have you mentally gotten stronger? Like, have you overcome obstacles that you thought may be actually, may inhibit your ability to make it to the stage? Have you enjoyed the process? Have you actually learned from the process, from the strategies that your coach has implemented? Have you managed to maintain the support of your family and your friends? Because that's a big one. And a lot of competitors, I find, lack self-awareness, and they aren't aware of their actions towards others in a contest prep, and they aren't aware of the people around them. They aren't aware of their feelings, and they kind of just live in their own little world where bodybuilding is the absolute most important thing and nothing else matters. When in reality, everyone around them has important things in their lives that are just as important as bodybuilding is in the competitor's life. And brushing away your family and friends for bodybuilding, again, will like, what's the point? Like, think about it this way: if you win a show, if you're lucky enough to win a show, but you've let bodybuilding destroy your life along the way, like, you've lost your family, you've lost your friends, not all of them, but you've lost some. Like, have you truly won? Like, have you truly been successful?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's obviously a question that the competitor themselves has to answer. No one else can answer that for them, and it's depending on your values and your beliefs. But that's the question that I kind of ask, that I would ask those individuals who have won the gold medal, but have been broken along the way.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of like,
whether
is it worth it?
Is it worth it? That's the thing. At the end of the day, for most of us, bodybuilding is just a hobby. Now, obviously, if you're training to be Mr. Olympia, it's a different ball game. But when it comes to natural bodybuilding, and the competitors that we deal with here, mostly at JPS, we really emphasize ensuring that the prep is manageable. We emphasize the importance of the client being able to handle the prep, making sure it doesn't break them, making sure they use it as a learning experience so that they can actually get stronger, psychologically. And hopefully, if they're passionate enough and they enjoy the process, well, they'll do a long off season and they'll come back and compete the year after or the 2 years after, and they'll look a lot better. And that's, like I said, bodybuilding is a long-term sport. You have to be willing to play the long game if you want to do really well. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with just doing one prep, just stepping on stage to see how you go. But those are the types of people who shouldn't be focused on the outcome, right? And then if you do want to take bodybuilding further, well, your first prep should be an enjoyable experience for the most part. Obviously, there's going to be times where it's super tough. But, like I said, it's a learning experience. And those are the individuals who have that type of mindset are the ones who tend to do pretty well in the long run. After they've competed multiple times and they've gotten better each time. They have been striving for improvement. In between seasons. That's super important as well. So when it comes to the psychology of a contest prep, those are a few things that kind of spring to mind.
I think it's really difficult, because it's like, a while ago I was thinking, it almost demotivated me from working, because I was like, I started reading, I've talked about it for the last ever, Stillness is the Key. Like, I've just been demolishing that book, right? And it really applies here. It's kind of like, well, you can achieve all these things, right? But at the end of the day, you get there, and if no one's there to be like, hey, good job, or I don't think it's even the celebration that matters. It's like, you will get there and you will get these things, right? Like, I've noticed the big changes in my psychological well-being have not been from any kind of success, whether it be with a podcast, uni, or whatever, or coaching or whatever. those haven't even mattered. Like, there've been the things that I've been thinking that I want, and then I get them and I'm like, holy, I wanted 1,000 views on a podcast. And then I get it and it's like, oh shit, that didn't fucking matter. It's like, it's kind of, it's very strange. You think it's going to be so much and then it doesn't matter. It's really scary. I've been listening to this podcast, the Happiness Lab, and it's really, really good. I think it applies quite a lot in this situation. It's kind of like, you think these certain things are going to make you happy, and you truly do. Like, you think these things will make a big impact, not even make you happy, make you feel as though it's a positive influence in your life. But it's kind of like, well, the things that I've noticed recently that have made me really happy have been like interactions with people, just like that. That has been the thing. Like, or like little things that I've read while just being present in the moment or something like that. Like, it's never really, the big achievement doesn't mean shit. Like, it's so, like with podcasts, I have all my statistics, my listeners, and I get to see how many views I get. And then every time I get to a big number, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, I don't care. Like, it's like, oh, cool. I'm not even happy for like a second. I'm just like, that's noteworthy. Like, it doesn't,
I understand with bodybuilding, sometimes it's hard to disregard the outcome considering you're working so hard for it. But the thing is, you don't get rewarded in bodybuilding for how hard you work.
No.
Or you don't get rewarded for how much weight you lost, for the obstacles that you've overcome along the way. Like, yes, that's super important to you as an individual because that's what makes you psychologically stronger. That's what allows you to improve. But at the end of the day, judges, quite frankly, don't care how far you've come. Like, they just see you for 10 minutes on stage, and the outcome is pretty much determined by how you look in that 10 minutes on stage. And a lot of people think that they're going to get rewarded for working hard and for outworking everyone else. Like, you see that mentality a lot in bodybuilding. Like, I'm going to outwork all my competitors, which means I'll get rewarded for that. Like, I should win if I outwork everyone, right? Now, that only works to a certain degree. Like, you have to fucking work hard to get to the stage and look really good, but there's always going to be someone out there who may be bigger than you genetically, who may have the potential to get leaner than you. And even if you outwork them, they may step on stage, and in that 10 minutes that you're on stage, they look a lot better than you do, and they're the ones who are going to get rewarded. And like, how are you going to feel about that if you've spent the whole prep, thinking about the win and, kind of working really hard just for that win, but not working really hard just to improve yourself physically and make sure that you display like, the best package possible on stage. Like, there's a difference between, outworking all your competitors so that you look your absolute best, or outworking all your competitors so that you win. Like, it's the mindset associated with that is the issue. And that's another, kind of problem that I see amongst some competitors, which does leave them disappointed, and they tend to perceive the prep as a failure when, in fact, they've made a lot of progress in other aspects of their life, which they've just disregarded because they've been so focused on outworking, everyone else, and just focused on the outcome. It's like, there's always going to be the dude out there who's bigger than you, and if he happens to be on stage when you're competing, it's bodybuilding, like, man,
it's something cool that I heard Bryce Lewis did. He basically, I think it was coming up, I think it was a certain period before a competition. Basically, he messaged all his people in his weight class that he sort of would follow normally, and he was like, hey man, I'm just going to unfollow you. I just don't want to, I want to be working against me. Like, I don't want to be working to beat your numbers. And it's quite like, it's quite evident. It's kind of like, I remember like a year ago, I was sort of like making podcasts and blah, blah, blah. And I was sort of thinking, what is this person doing? What is that person doing? And I'm always trying to think about what all these other podcasts are doing. And it's kind of, all it did was detract from what I was doing and make what I was doing not as good or as valuable as original or unique. I think this stuff is very applicable to just normal everyday life. Like, it's like,
for sure. All the qualities that you gain from a bodybuilding prep, if you approach it, in the right manner with the appropriate mindset, will feed into the rest of your life, and they will help you along, with whatever it is that you decide to do in your life after the prep. And that's why we can't let our clients be broken from the process, because at the end of the day, if they get broken, well, what they have kind of gained from the prep, they're not going to be able to use it in the rest of their lives because they're just going to have this negative association to bodybuilding always stuck in their heads. They're pretty much going to disregard the whole prep. So, they spend 6 months prepping or whatever it is. It's a tricky situation. That's why at JPS, we ensure that, before our bodybuilders start a prep, we word them up. We tell them, what they're in for. We provide them with education.
Informed consent, effectively.
Yeah, you need to know what you're in for. You need to understand the process to some degree. You need to know that you're going to have mood disturbances. You're probably going to struggle to sleep. You're going to feel excessive lethargy. There's so many kind of effects, not necessarily side effects, but just these things that come along the way with bodybuilding that people just don't understand and they're not aware of when they enter the prep. Like, a lot of people will hear others speak about the prep, and like some people say, "Oh, I lost 10 kilos and I made it to the stage." Oh, well, if you lost 10 kilos, that means I can lose 10 kilos and make it to the stage too. Well, hold on a sec. Like, it's not all about just losing weight. Like, you can't just, like, some people will approach coaches and say, oh, how much weight do I need to lose to get to the stage? Or maybe 10 kilos? All right, let's do it. So, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, like, weight loss is just a piece of the puzzle. Like, there's so many other aspects that contribute to the bodybuilding prep, which, are just as important, if not more important than weight loss. And they are the aspects that need to be discussed before starting the prep.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people will get to that point in a prep where they're experiencing the side effects, so to speak, and they'll start having these negative associations, these negative feelings being associated with the prep, and a lot of competitors even verbally communicate these negative feelings to others. Like, I hear it all the time. Like, when you're at a bodybuilding show, like, people saying, "Oh, I can't wait for this to be over. Man, I hate my life right now. Like, I'm just so hungry. This is shit. I'm just starving myself to death." Like, you don't want to have you don't want to associate these negative feelings towards prep. Like, you want to try and maintain a positive attitude towards it.
Yeah.
Because the way you perceive a certain experience can influence the way your body responds. And if you know what you are in for, you are more likely to have a positive attitude towards the prep because it's not going to be as much of a shock to you. So I think that, directing positive affirmations towards the prep is also a critical component of, psychological sustainability. Because when I hear people speak about these negative feelings that they have towards the prep, I start to also question their passion. Like, if you're not enjoying this prep,
then why do it effectively? It's like natural bodybuilding. You don't earn any money. It's not that useful. It's a huge burden on your life during prep. Like, there's no doubt you won't perform as well in other areas. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of like, it's like if I started complaining every time I had to do a podcast or I had to edit a podcast, it's like, man, like, frankly, shut the fuck up. Like, you picked this. Like,
it's the same concept.
You chose this. It's like, if I complain, when people complain about going to university and getting the undergrad degree, it's like, you picked this. You have the privilege to do this. It's I don't know. It's inherently, it's kind of just kind of a little bit of gratitude at the end of the day. Like, it's I get it's probably harder in a prep because, one, I've never experienced it, but two, it's also like your whole body is telling you, like, what are you doing, mate? Like, your body is not very happy with you, and it's it's obviously going to feel psychologically and physiologically draining.
Well, that's the thing. When I start to question someone's passion, I then start to question whether or not they should be competing. And, like, yes, you don't need passion to compete in bodybuilding. Like, it's never, like, in a perfect world, every natural bodybuilder would be super passionate about the sport, but that's not the case, especially at the rate bodybuilding is growing these days. But the individuals who do enter competitive bodybuilding and are really passionate about it are the ones that have, like, passion sitting in their corner, kind of pushing them along the way. Whereas the other individuals who aren't passionate about the sport, don't even exactly know why they're doing it, are the ones who kind of have to rely solely on, like, their discipline to, like, get them through. And that's super hard. And that's when you start seeing those negative feelings start to creep out. And,
like, something that I've noticed recently is, like, I've been doubting my passion about natural bodybuilding. It's like,
interesting.
I want to compete at some point,
Yeah.
But then like Jacob literally, I put something on my story and I was like, oh, should I compete? And then he just messaged me like, why?
A
Classic
critical
Jacob.
question.
Yeah, it's like, and then
Yeah.
I'm like, not exactly sure why.
Yeah.
And then I've been growing my interest in my diabetes, and it's like, is muscle for muscle's sake that useful? I don't know. And it's just kind of, yeah, I think it's critical to evaluate like, okay, why am I doing this? It's like, if I wanted to compete, say next year, it's like, that would be an incredible burden. Like there's a bunch of shit that I'm doing next year that I've never done before. It's going to be harder than I can imagine. Prep would
Yeah.
be a pretty bad idea, especially next year. In like
Yeah.
3 years time, maybe, but it's
Yeah.
like, it's still a maybe, because it's like, if I don't want to do it, why would I do it? Like,
Mhm. Well, yeah, those are two factors that I kind of address initially when a client like approaches me about contest prep. So the first thing I ask is why? Like, why do you actually want to compete? Like,
mm,
just tell me why.
mm,
After that, we kind of establish when they actually want to compete. If they provide, sufficient enough answer that, based on what I deem is sufficient at that point.
mm,
The next question is like, is your lifestyle going to be conducive to doing bodybuilding
mm,
prep? Because if it's not going to be conducive to a prep,
mm,
you need to understand that bodybuilding comes with a huge time commitment, just a huge commitment in general, and it can definitely interfere with other aspects of your life, and you kind of need to be willing to accept that. Because at the end of
mm,
the day, you're signing up for this. Like, this is on you. And again, you can't come to me, 6 months down the track complaining about, your relationships and this and that. Like, that's why you need to be aware of it
mm,
initially, because being aware of all those things that can pop up along the way, there's
mm,
always going to be obstacles that pop up along the way. Being aware of them is important. Will reduce the chances of them being severely impacted, because you can safeguard yourself from that stuff. It's important to know. Like, yeah, your lifestyle is never going to be perfect for bodybuilding, but if you have an understanding of everything that we've just spoken about now, you can safeguard yourself from from those from those potential issues that can arise down the track.
mm.
And that's where where a coach comes into play, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of my role. That's what I do. Like, I plan the prep out to ensure that I take into account everything that can potentially pop up in the client's life based on what they tell me they have going on in specific periods of time. Like I mentioned earlier, I word them up on everything that can kind of arise throughout a prep so that they know what they're in for. And planning ahead is just super important. And that's
Yeah.
why a longer prep is generally the way to go with most people. Like, really, most people should be prepping for 20 plus weeks, especially if it's their first time. And a lot of people don't. Like, a lot of people get into bodybuilding and do like the 12-week prep. It's like a bikini girl can do that, but man, it's going to be an extreme diet. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to be tough. Even for bikini girls, I'd recommend a slightly longer
Mm.
prep, because that way they can just do it in a more sustainable
Yeah.
manner, a manner that isn't going to greatly interfere with their lifestyle,
Mm.
because with a lot of those individuals who do take a 12-week prep, man, their life takes a big hit because they're
Yeah.
not ready for it.
No, I can't understand how people would, um, why people would put themselves on a shorter time frame. It's like, man, like in every aspect, it's a bad idea. It's like, more aggressive, you'll lose more muscle. It'll be harder.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
it's
they're
like,
not
if
aware of
anything
those
goes
things. That's the
wrong,
thing.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really
They're just not
like,
aware of it.
yeah, it's yeah, like I'm planning on doing a mini cut, and it's like, that'll be like maybe a whole mesocycle. It's like, like life is split up into mesocycles, right? It's like
Mm.
2 mesocycles for a prep. Fuck no. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, nah. Like, I don't know. It's definitely, it's definitely. I think there's something with contest prep. It's kind of like, well, everyone when they first get into bodybuilding, they think I should do this, and then more and more I think to myself, should I do this? Like, it's kind of, well, if I want to achieve other things in life, this is going to be a significant thing. I know that I'm never going to do that well in bodybuilding just because I'm so disproportional. Naturally, I don't have that much muscle. I don't know. I'm just not. I don't think I'm built
Yeah.
for bodybuilding, and that's fine, and it's cool. But it's like,
Yeah.
I think that's why I think it'll be easy for me to not really give a fuck about the outcome, because I don't expect to win. Because it's like, they'll just be like, "Hey man, get symmetrical," and I'll be like, "Well, fuck." And then,
Yeah. Oh well. Can't do much about that.
no, exactly. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's something that I
Yeah.
I think one day I'll figure out if I'm going to do it or not. But when I do it, I want to do it correctly.
Yeah,
And I can't see myself having a
as
massive
long
career in
as
it.
you go, yeah, yeah, yeah. As long as you go into it understanding that it's a hobby, it's something that you really want to do. You're not going to be the best natural bodybuilder out there. Like I think that's totally fine. It really all comes down to the mindset you adopt going into the prep. That can really determine how things kind of play out.
Yeah. Do you know, I think his name is Brett Freeman. I only know his Instagram name, BAFTA. He's a really good natural
Mm-hmm.
bodybuilder.
Yeah.
You'd probably know him if you saw his physique. He's like
Okay.
WNBF world's lightweight champ, I think, last year and the year before
Yep.
potentially. That might be very incorrect, but it's been cool to see him and like someone like Helms basically do a prep, still psychologically be okay, but then acknowledge like, okay, at times I'm a dickhead, like because of prep. It's just like these things are going to occur, and it's very cool to see kind of the realities of it, but then still seeing like, okay, for instance, with Brett, it's like this is one of the best natural bodybuilders in the world. Absolutely, like retardedly insane physique. Like it's like the most beautiful physique I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And then you look at it and you're just like, okay. And then every second post of his is him like playing with his kid or something. So it's like, like he's not just like, okay, here's me at 5 a.m. grinding. Like his story is like him going to work and like him doing normal shit. Like it's cool to see that
Cool.
there's a it's possible to have balance. You don't have
He's
to
a
be a
true
psycho.
bodybuilding influencer.
Literally, like it's like,
Yeah.
it's just a responsible role model.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have those, people to look up to, especially if you're
Mm.
considering and doing like your first show. A lot of individuals who have just gone into bodybuilding and they're keen on prepping. That's not the type of person they're going to follow. We know this. There's just so many influencers out there that are more likely to be followed, and
Yeah.
that's another kind of problem that I see in bodybuilding. Like we've probably spoken about this before, but like individuals kind of seeing what others do on Instagram and just going ahead with it. It's like, what works for them, it's not going to work for you. Like, the first time competitor needs to take the longer approach, like I said, needs to implement the maintenance periods, the refeeds, just to kind of increase the sustainability of that 20-week diet, because they're the ones who are more prone to kind of falling off track, right? Like picking up eating disorders, potentially body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
And planning a strategic prep and implementing those maintenance periods in between and stuff, taking a longer approach, can have a massive impact on, I guess, the outcome of the prep in general. And
do you
that's
feel like
where
do you feel like as people looking to prep, they should, like, for instance, me and Steve, Revive Stronger, we know each other very well. I know I'll prep with Steve. It's like, it's just because he knows me well. He knows all the retarded dumb shit that I do as a human being and all the dumb psychological stuff that I have. And like, he understands that. He understands me, what I am like in off season. And then it's like, I know when I go to prep with Steve, it's like, I'll probably want like 6 months prior or something, 3 months prior, whatever, before I even commence prep to be working with him already. Like that would be like pretty foolproof plan. Because then it's like, okay, this is what everything's like right now. This is how everything's moving. These are the kind of habits we've got. This is the shit that's not like that good. And then go into a prep. Do you feel like that's sort of the like optimal and probably not the most common situation?
Look, I definitely do. If only everyone reached out to me and said, "Oh, I'd love to do a 6 months off season and then get into a prep," like that'd be great. But we do get at JPS a lot of individuals who just want to kind of get straight into it, and sometimes like we can't just say no to everyone. Like there comes a point where it's just not feasible to just turn people down.
And it's like, where are they going to get? Like, otherwise,
away.
they might go to a coach where it's like they don't know the safer
100%.
things.
Correct. So, I've taken up individuals who I've kind of just put straight into a prep. I've taken up individuals who I have worked with for 6 to 10 months before starting a prep. And I do feel those are the individuals, the clients who get the most out of the experience as a whole. I definitely think that is the best way to go about it if you are a client or an individual looking to compete. Like I recommend finding a coach early on. Like just talk. Like don't even think about picking a show or anything like that. Like find a coach who you think you'll be able to trust. Speak to them about the process and see what they recommend. Like work with them to kind of create a plan and establish a goal. A goal in regards to when they're going to compete, when you're going to compete. I think that's the best way to go about it because, the off season is where obviously all the physical gains are made. But not only that, like the psychological gains that will help you throughout a prep are also made in the off season. Like, if I have a bodybuilder who I know is going to compete one day, then the off season, I'm not just working on their physique. Like I'm speaking to them about the prep, about what to expect, teaching them about what I kind of went through in a prep and how I made these mistakes and how we're going to try not to make these mistakes. This is why we're going to take a longer option and whatnot. That can go a long way, and it just makes for an easy transition to the prep because, let's say you've worked with someone for 6 to 10 months, you put them through a gaining phase, you potentially put them through like a mini cut, you know how their body responds to calories, you know how their body responds to training, you have a fair understanding of like how their metabolism works, what they respond best to. It just makes for an easy transition into the contest prep period, and it reduces the amount of guesswork you have to do. Think about starting a prep with a client who you've just met. Like, yeah, I've done it before, and look, it can be done, like no doubt, but it takes a little bit of guesswork initially. Like, there's no other way around it.
Yeah.
Unless they provide me with like a bunch of data that they've kind of tracked on their own over the past few months. But
and then assuming the data's good.
Assuming the data is good, right? So in most cases, when I do need to start a prep with a client, pretty much right away, I do tend to start a maintenance period initially, like instead of getting them straight into a cut, like just an introductory phase. That's kind of what I call it, just to get an understanding of how they respond to the calories, like where their maintenance calories are at. In most cases, a lot of these clients come to me with an experience or with like the experience of training at high volumes for a prolonged period of time. So like a drop in training volume is generally the way to go at that point as well. Like this 2 to 4 week period, I kind of use as an introductory phase, like I mentioned, and it just allows me to gain understanding of where they're currently at. It allows me to kind of build a plan, and obviously because we don't have that much time, considering they want to compete in 5-6 months or whatever, then we kind of start the contest prep right after that phase. But I always take a bit of time to just slowly transition the client into the prep, and I never really just go straight into the prep. Like it just doesn't work that way. Like you have to understand the client, you have to know where they're at, you have to word them up, educate them about the prep, and then go from there.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things where we don't want to. It's very delicate. It's kind of like it's a race against time, but we don't want to have if we make it a race against time and we're literally racing against time, it's like it's pretty dangerous, or we're just going to run into a bunch of obstacles. Is there any sort of like things you would consider generally a good idea to have sort of as prerequisites before even considering prepping? Like, for instance, me 2 years ago, I thought it's almost comical. Like I thought I could sort of go into a prep, and it's like, man, I was tiny. I'd never dieted in my life. I didn't understand anything about prepping at all. I wasn't even nearly ready. I didn't even run a specific program. I would just go in and do what I wanted to do on the day. I'd never tracked macros in my life. It was, Do you feel like there's sort of some general prerequisites that people it's probably a good idea to get in line?
Yeah, I definitely think so. So, all the mindset and psychological aspects, which we spoke about earlier, I think are important. So, you were talking about self-awareness, the ability to take kind of ownership for the contest prep. It's the psychological aspect is super important. And I think just clients need to understand the harsh realities of a prep. Like, I've spoken about this, but to just take it a bit further, like you need to understand that it's controlled starvation. The human body is designed to fight back, and it's going to be tough. You have to embrace the suck. And it's probably a lot harder than what you think it is. Like that's an important conversation to have initially. you now understand that fatigue and lethargy are going to be quite evident and quite aggressive throughout the prep as well. We're talking about hunger, prolonged hunger, social activity is probably going to take a bit of a hit. So, just building an awareness of those things is super important as well. Also, you need to have self-improvement mentality, I think. Like I said, the individuals who are outcome focused tend to be the ones who are disappointed, at the end of the prep. And just focusing on improving yourself from a physical and a psychological standpoint is something that is a type of mindset that you want to adopt from the get-go. Relationship with your body is also important. Like, a lot of individuals get into bodybuilding to correct body image issues. Now, I'm not sure if that's the way to go. I don't think bodybuilding can help correct issues. I think it can only make them worse. Like, in some cases, yes, someone may be able to get through a bodybuilding contest prep and, get over their body dysmorphia. But in most cases, that's not the way it works. Like, bodybuilding just tends to make these issues worse, right?
Yeah. It's kind of, I think a progressive surplus can be a much more healthy idea.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, I remember I hated how I looked, and then I basically gained a bunch of muscle. Now it's pretty hard to feel bad about how I look. I'm pretty content with it. Like, okay, what else can I do? Get on steroids or just be way more aggressive with my rigidity of training and nutrition? It's like, well, cool. It's kind of like, at this point, you just got to accept it. Like, but then with dieting, it's like, you can just, that's a deep hole you can dig. Like, fuck. But yeah, I think I spoke about this with Aaron before. I think it's a dangerous game to play, I think, to try and use bodybuilding to fix any psychological issue, whether that be like normal psychology or like body dysmorphia. Like, pretty bad idea.
Yeah. Some people see bodybuilding as like a weight loss challenge. Well, it's not a weight loss challenge. Like, it's the pinnacle of all body composition endeavors. It's, and you just can't treat it that way.
No.
And another prerequisite is, like, you need to accept weight gain. And this is a big one, because a lot of people, aspiring bodybuilders, don't know how to gain weight. They don't know how to gain weight in a controlled manner, and they can't accept it. Like, what happens when you go on a refeed throughout the prep? Your body weight will probably go up. If you do a maintenance period, it might go up. Like, there's definitely going to be times throughout a prep where your body weight is going to fluctuate upwards due to many factors. And how about after the prep? Like, that's something that is hardly ever talked about. Like, the post-comp period is just sometimes harder than the contest period itself. It's not uncommon for individuals to gain weight, rapidly after a contest prep.
Like, you hear some horror stories.
It's
just like,
man. And
it's hard watching it, and then like actually being in that position. I can imagine. Like, I did a tiny cut a while ago, and I felt pretty shredded, and then I just went back to normal bulking, and I felt fat, and it's like I still have like visibly lean abs. I can see my serratus, like pretty veiny all over. Like, I feel like I'm pretty lean, and I've never had an issue with body fat, and I had an issue with it. Like, I can't even imagine what it's like in like contest prep. You're as shredded as you've ever been, and then you gain 10 kilos in 6 weeks. It's like,
and you know what? Even if it's gained in a controlled manner, some individuals just struggle to accept it. And that's why I'm reluctant to take up individuals who haven't gone through a gaining phase before, who haven't gained weight in a controlled manner. And like I said earlier, sometimes, we can't say no to all clients. But that just means that I have to, pay more attention to their post-comp period and make sure that throughout the prep, I'm drip feeding in all this post-comp information to ensure that they understand when the prep's done, they're going to gain weight. Like, it's going to happen. You're not maintaining this lean physique. You know what? After the prep, you're going to feel guilty for overeating, because everyone overeats after a contest prep. Like, you just need to understand that's going to happen.
It's like,
well, it's part of the process. Like, it's, accepting weight gain is a big one, I think, because, if an individual can have a successful contest prep, can do all the things that we mentioned earlier, but then if they can't handle that post-comp period, well, man, they
Devastating.
can be
Yeah.
broken. It doesn't have to be the contest prep that has to break the individual. Like, that post-com period, it's definitely got potential to break an individual as well. So
I've heard some damn horror stories on
man.
Go listen to some of 3DMJ's podcasts on this shit. It's like, go listen to some of their horror stories. It's like, that will give you a reality of what contest prep is like. It's like,
people underestimate how rapidly you can gain weight after a prolonged energy deficit, especially something like contest prep. Like, you need to understand your body kind of creates this self-defense mechanism within it that just increases the absorption of calories after a contest prep. And man, you can put on fat, real fast, because it doesn't want you at that body weight. Like, it wants to pull you right back. And, it's been resisting you've been resisting your body for, like, let's say 20 weeks. And, the way I see it is like this. So, in a contest prep, you're kind of locked up in this cage, right? You're restricted. That's how it is. And when you compete and, the contest prep is done, a lot of people just kick that cage door open and they kind of unleash. Like, they're out and they're smashing food and, weight just goes through the roof. Now, what you want to do after a contest prep is you don't want to kick that cage door open. You kind of want to open it just enough to bring in some flexibility. And you don't want to leave it slightly open, because that way, you're going to still be restrained. So you need to open it just enough to bring in some flexibility. And then you kind of want to open it slowly on a weekly basis and get to the point where you've completely opened that cage door, but you just don't feel the need to raid your pantry and consume 5,000 calories in one sitting. So that's the way I kind of see the post-com period. You need to slowly open that door, and kicking it down, man, that comes with a lot of drawbacks, psychologically and physically.
Man, like, I can't even fathom that. Like, recently I've been eating so much that I've been going to bed pretty bloated. Like, it's like I'm eating like 4,000 plus ish, I reckon, and I'm trying to eat vegetables and shit now, like, be healthy and all that. Because Steve was like, "Hey James, you have to eat vegetables," and I was like, "Fuck, okay." And then and now it's like I'm going to bed, and it's literally like I'm just bloated as fuck. And then it's like, imagine eating that much after you've basically eaten nothing for the last like 6 months. It's like, God,
man.
And
like,
oh fuck. And I know people could do it.
No. Your body's not going to say no. Like, it's going to take them all up.
Fuck.
God. Like you said, the horror stories that I've heard when it comes to contest prep, like,
shit,
10 kilos in like less than a week. Like, man, for like an 80, 90 kilo dude, like, that's not uncommon. You know what I mean? Like, that's possible. Like,
like, my friend Josh just prepped, Josh Bridgman from the UK, and he's assisted, and he's like quite a large dude, and he was fucking shredded, and he was, I think he would have stepped on stage at like 88, and would have been a month or two ago maybe. Now he's 100. And it's like, he's still pretty lean. He's just sort of tapered up, relatively sort of controlled. It's like, he let himself eat the day after. I hope I got all these facts right. It's always interesting when I sort of, because it's like, I don't think that I'm like talking to people, and then I just say things and I'm like, oh, here's this person, this anecdote. Because I just, like, I would in a normal conversation. One thing I was actually thinking about, and this is completely, are we good for time? Just one more question, I think.
That's fine, man. Let's do it.
Cool. So, one thing that I was just thinking anecdotally, do you think theoretically prep, like, say if I just wanted to get as big as possible naturally, I don't care about my body fat percentage to a point, do you think prepping would decrease the overall ability to put on mass, especially in your younger years? Like, do you think, not even just time frame wise, like just your ability, just because of, and this is probably a lot of speculation, like, do you think generally, say if I am 20, 21, if I did a prep now, do you think that would negatively affect my total amount of muscle mass I could have gained, even if I had spent the same amount of time gaining? Not sort of that works weirdly time-wise.
So I kind of get where you're coming from. It's hard to kind of answer that. Now, like, if I give you my own anecdote, so I competed when I was 19. So that was like 6 months in it, calorie deficit. Competed again the year after when I was 20. So that's that was like 9 months in a calorie deficit.
Wow. Shit.
So you think about it that way, that's like over a year, well over a year that I've spent in a calorie deficit where I haven't been building muscle in my, let's say, 6-year training career so far. So, yeah, I could definitely say that has, I guess, reduced my ability to maximize my muscle building potential. I'm not sure if I can say that's going to interfere with your long-term ability to maximize muscle growth, though. That was an interesting question. I think individuals will always shortcut themselves if they compete too regularly. Like, that's definitely something that I see in the bodybuilding community, like individuals who compete on a year-to-year basis. You're not giving yourself any time to grow. Like, what's a 6 month off, less than a 6 month off season going to do? Like, if you think about it, it's a 6 month prep. You're going to spend a month or so kind of fucking around essentially after the prep, like recovering, like slowly getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do that, and then they do like a 5 month mini off season and do another prep. Like, I think doing that consistently on a year-to-year basis definitely reduces your ability to maximize muscle growth. And you see that in these individuals on stage. They end up looking the same each year, if not worse. Like, I've definitely seen that before. But I guess in my case, I don't think that would have, competing twice in my young years would inhibit my ability to maximize my potential, as long as I spend sufficient amounts of time in a gaining phase, eating in a calorie surplus, which I am now, and I don't have any short-term bodybuilding goals in mind. Like, my next, I guess, goal is hopefully compete in 2022. So that's like 3 years away.
Potentially same. So I'll see.
I might see you on stage. So that would mean I've had like a 5-year off season, or I think it's about 5 years. So yeah, man, interesting question there. Yeah, the only thing that I want to highlight is that you probably shouldn't be competing year to year. Spending sufficient time in a calorie surplus in between shows is not only going to provide you benefits physically, but also physiologically and psychologically. Like, the prep definitely takes a lot out of you, and you need time to recover from that. Like, I've heard of individuals still, being, 12 months, 12 months post show and still not recovered psychologically, and wanting to start another prep to fix the issues that they're currently facing. And like you said, I think at that point, embarking on a maintenance period and slowly building those calories up is the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
And just accept the fact that you need a bit of an off season before you can step on stage if you want to look better than you did before, and if you really want to, fix these underlying issues.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting, sort of the time frames of this, because for me, it's like I've been fortunate enough to start out so light that all I've done is bulked. It's like I did one cut and it was practically a joke. Like, it was like, and for me, it's kind of been like, I would be interested to get into one more question if you have time. This is one thing that I think about a lot. Do you think it's a pretty good idea in your younger years to get reasonably fat? Like, for instance, we have a lot of people anecdotally, right, sort of have this sort of bear mode or dreamer bulk, or they just get pretty fat in general. Like, you look at, for instance, Nunes, it's like when he was young, he got up to like 200 plus, 220 maybe, something like that. And it's like you have a lot of people sort of getting relatively heavy, and especially in certain bodybuilding scenes, even especially in the natural scene, it's like you have people sort of trying to get relatively fat. But then on the other hand, you have certain people that will sort of embrace the sort of more mini cutting model and like the sort of paradigm of like, okay, every certain amount of time we'll do a mini cut, keep body fat under control. And then you have people who will sort of promote the whole thing of like, okay, before we even start gaining, we'll do a cut to get you in a position to gain. Where do you sit on that kind of spectrum?
I've utilized all those approaches with clients. Haven't really gotten too far into the bear mode, with my clients. I think the bear mode, approach has potential benefits, and one of those benefits is just the ability to train really, really hard. Like, when you're eating a fuck ton of food, you're the heaviest you've ever been, you're feeling good, man, you can get some decent sessions in, you can train really hard, but at that point, you need to understand that your potential to build muscle may be slightly reduced. And there's a lot of factors that can feed into this. So high amounts of body fat can cause testosterone to estrogen conversion. Well, that's not a good thing if you want to build muscle. We see in many studies that as you gain more and more weight, as you increase your calorie surplus, as surplus size increases, fat mass increases, and lean body mass doesn't increase to the same degree. Like, if we compare a group that is eating in a very high calorie surplus and a group that is eating in a slight surplus, in most cases, what we see is the group that's eating heaps of food gains a whole lot of fat when compared to the group that isn't eating in a very high surplus, and they gain just a little bit more muscle. So, like, they do get bigger, they do gain more muscle mass, but it's not a significant there's not a significant difference between the two groups, put it that way. And that may mean that more mini cuts are needed, if you do take that bare mode approach. I tend to sit in the middle, so like I tend to sit with most things anyway. So I think getting fairly it's hard to kind of quantify this, but getting fairly heavy like in a prep in an off season is a good thing, as long as you do embark on mini cuts to ensure that it doesn't get out of hand, and making sure that you're maintaining a rate of gain that is appropriate. And over time that'll take you to a point where you're sitting at the top end of your body fat settling point, potentially slightly over it, and there you go. It's time to do a mini cut. I think the problem arises when people when individuals' rate of gain is too fast and they get fat too soon, they reach bear mode too soon, and then they have to kind of pull back real quick. Like, if it takes you 12 months to reach bear mode and then you pull back, well, that's fine. You've been gaining for 12 months and you haven't been super fat for a lot of it. Like, you slowly built up to that point, right? But if you reach bear mode in like 4 months, well, you've been fat for a lot of that period because you've gained weight so fast. So, I kind of sit in my approach with most of my bodybuilders is maintaining an appropriate rate of gain for as long as I can, when I feel that they put on a decent amount of body fat, they're potentially getting a little uncomfortable with it.
Mainly sort of psychological uncomfort usually.
Yeah, psychological uncomfort. I have to take that into account. Like, I can't just keep pushing the bodybuilder beyond their limits. Like, especially with females, that's important. When we get to that point, a mini cut is obviously something that we undertake, and then we kind of just rinse and repeat. With a lot of my males, I find that I can push a little harder as they start to gain, more body fat. They're somewhat fine with that. But I have to remember that, as we gain body fat, our ability to build muscle probably decreases to some degree. So, I'm always going to pull back, make sure I bring them back to that leaner state, so that I can then rinse and repeat, bring their calories back up and embark on another prolonged gaining phase, where the goal, again, is to maintain an appropriate rate of gain. And hopefully, the second time we kind of come around to that gaining phase, they're eating more calories than they were the first time at the same body weight. And hopefully their body composition has improved. And that's generally what I see with my clients that do invest in a long-term gaining phase, and then potentially a mini cut and a return to a gaining phase. Body composition improvements all around, and just their ability to take in calories also improves, which is important because calories can help from a training standpoint, right?
I think it's pretty interesting. Like, a lot of the stuff we sort of put a sort of limit on what we can do as natural athletes, but then it's like, if we're taking that from the literature, or if we're taking that from anecdotal observations, it's like, I think it's important to make sure people realize, like, you can gain a significant amount of muscle for a long ass time as a natural. It's like, I don't know how long I've been lifting as a natural, something like 4 or 5 years now, something like that. And I feel like I'm gaining like fast as fuck. Like, not like weight. I just mean like I'm progressing in so many areas, and it's really weird. It's like, okay, everyone always tells you natural bodybuilding is slow, but I think it's important to realize like it's not that slow if you do things correctly. Stay consistent during an off season, like commit to an off season.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really,
yeah.
I think it's something I think we often overemphasize how slow natural bodybuilding is, and yeah, it's slow, but like progress does get made. Like it's not like 0% per year kind of progress or 1%.
Yeah,
like
yeah. It does. Yeah, whether you're male or female, like a lot of people tend to say that females don't make as much progress as males do. Right, man, they do. You know, if they dedicate themselves to a long-term gaining phase, which a lot of them aren't necessarily willing to. So, you know, like you said, you can definitely make a lot of progress if you stay consistent. You dedicate yourself to an off season, and you keep it. Yeah, you keep it running, man. Like, you know, if you want to compete, like, and there's really no rush, take your time. Like, get to a point where you feel you've developed enough to like do a long-term cut and still look like you lift. You know, that's important. So,
yeah, that's the thing. Should we finish off here? Thank you for that was absolutely fantastic conversation. I think we got into some really interesting topics, and I think it'll be interesting editing. I'm trying to think about how I'm gonna sort of make sure everything is coherent, because I think I directed you all over the place, but
that's all right. I love talking about this shit. Like you know.
You're a plethora of knowledge. So where can people find you if people want coaching from you? Where can they go? What is JPS? Where can you find it?
Yeah, so you can, best place to find me is probably Instagram, so MR Fitness with a double underscore at the end, Mr. Fitness.
Yeah, can I start a petition to change that too?
I don't think that'll work on me. jpshealthandfitness.com.au for coaching, so you can find, you know, a lot of, you know, what we do on JPS on our website, even JPS Education on Instagram and the main JPS Health and Fitness page. We also run a 12-week mentorship if, you know, coaches are interested. That pretty much covers everything that you need to know as a coach. So that's pretty cool. That's all online, so it's accessible to anyone, you know, around the world. And so is our online coaching program. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, and hopefully everyone's aware of JPS by now. I feel like
I don't think so, but we're working on it.
I mean, hopefully the listeners are, at least. It's kind of like,
okay.
Well, I fucking hope so. I'm doing my best to like make sure everyone's aware.
Yeah.
Because it's one of the companies where it's like, wow, you guys deserve a shit ton more followers. It's like, but I think it's only gonna just like literally like that in the next few years, and it's it's very cool.
You're one of our main representatives, so we definitely appreciate that.
Ambassador.
Ambassador. JPS ambassador.
Cool. Hey guys, welcome to the Hypertrophy Hustle Show. So this week I'm speaking to Martin Refalo. So Martin Refalo is the coach and education coordinator at JPS. So Martin, do you want to give people a little introduction about yourself, sort of tell people what you do at JPS and sort of who you are?
Yeah, man. First off, thank you for letting me get back on the show.
My pleasure.
Always privileged. So yeah, I'm the coach and education coordinator at JPS. So my role at JPS is to, you know, manage the coaches, make sure they stay on track with their upskilling, their knowledge, making sure that they're, you know, doing really well with their clients. Also, I, you know, play a part in, I guess, content creation and help run some of the workshops that, you know, we run out of JPS, which, you know, are now nationally recognized in Australia, actually, which is pretty cool. I'm also a contest preparation coach, so I help a lot of, you know, aspiring competitors get to the stage, and I'm grateful to, you know, work with quite a few bodybuilders, aspiring bodybuilders who have a long-term focus, are willing to, you know, invest in the off season and make sure that they fulfill their potential when it does come time to do a contest prep. So that's pretty cool. I'm also currently doing my master's in applied sports science at Deakin University in Melbourne, and nearly finished that. I just have to write a thesis and then I'm done. So that's going to be my next big project. Looking forward to it though. You know, I don't mind writing, especially when it's writing about something I'm passionate about. So that's pretty cool. I just finished writing a literature review as well, which I just handed in, and I'm hoping to get that published in the next few months. So I discussed high load and low load repetitions for strength and hypertrophy, whether one is better than the other. So that was a cool experience, actually getting to go through the research process. Like I outlined, off air earlier, it was quite an extensive process, but it was rewarding because, like I mentioned as well, you kind of start to build up a really strong knowledge base about a certain area of, knowledge. And in this case, it was, high load and low load repetitions for hypertrophy and their effect on, hypertrophy and strength and whatnot. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. So yeah.
Yeah. And then do you want to dive into that a little bit, actually? It's something that I think is quite cool. So what was the general sort of consensus that you came to with it? And what do you think was anything in there that you didn't really expect, or anything you found became sort of a limitation when it came to sort of doing the review?
Yeah, well, Brad Schoenfeld did a very similar review in 2017. And my goal was to just do an updated version of his review. Nothing out of the ordinary that I guess came out of the results. High load and low load repetitions both seem to be equally beneficial for hypertrophy, as long as relative intensity is accounted for, as long as there is a full motor unit recruitment evident throughout each set, to ensure that we recruit, fast twitch fibers, which have the greatest potential for growth. It didn't really depend on the measure of hypertrophy, which is also important to take into account when trying to make inferences from certain studies, because each study will have a different measure of hypertrophy. So some studies measure hypertrophy via ultrasound, CT scan, MRI, muscle biopsy. So it is important to take that all into account. And the research showed that across all measures of hypertrophy, both high load and low load repetition training was equally as beneficial. We also have to consider whether or not studies were volume equated. In this case, they weren't there, and there didn't seem to be a volume dependent influence on hypertrophy either, which goes to show that relative intensity may be more important than volume. We don't know exactly yet. There obviously needs to be more research on that. There's obviously research out there that shows, the more sets you do, generally the more you will grow. There seems to be a dose response relationship with set volume and hypertrophy. In this case, though, like I said, there was no volume dependent influence. Again, training to failure was inconsistent across studies. That's definitely something you have to take into account too. And what else? Top of my head. That's pretty much it for hypertrophy.
Was in terms of something that I've been thinking about recently, and this is just sort of a little tangent. In terms of programming for the sort of in general, I think you guys have outlined this a little bit at JPS. It's sort of, I think in one of your infographics, I believe you touched on it briefly. It was like sort of how we've got this whole sort of RIR versus failure, right? But then it's like, I think, for instance, something like a bicep curl, a sort of small muscle group isolation, especially in the higher rep range. Do you feel as though generally, if we're going in a pretty high rep range, we can use a pretty, we can generally go pretty close to failure for the most part, and it's a pretty decent idea across the board. And then compared to something like, so in terms of the relative intensity of that, we want it to be relatively close to failure, but then something like a big compound in a relatively low rep range, that's probably where we'd be more likely to want to actually implement RIR and sort of manage fatigue a little bit more.
Yeah, well, exercises do seem to lend themselves better to certain rep ranges. And like you briefly outlined there, the compound movements, the movements that are more fatiguing systemically do tend to lend themselves better to the lower repetitions, higher loads. And it's probably in your best interest to make sure you are using some type of RIR or RP or just fatigue management system in general, because these movements are the movements that can acquire large amounts of fatigue, which can definitely have its drawbacks. When it comes to the isolation movements like side raises, bicep curls, if you are doing higher repetition ranges, which they do tend to lend themselves better to higher repetition work, using an RIR RP still has its place. It's still important. These movements aren't going to cause the same amount of fatigue and just systemic stress as like the compound movements will. So you could argue that it's not as important as it would be for the compound movements. I still implement that with my clients. One consideration to make is that lower load and higher repetition sets tend to come with more discomfort, and the research shows that, like when you're doing a 20 plus repetition set of bicep curls, the chances of the individual cutting the set short, so volitionally terminating the set due to discomfort, increases, right? And that doesn't necessarily equal true muscle fatigue. Like a client who is, I guess, untrained, not very experienced, may not be able to distinguish between discomfort and true muscle fatigue, and that's a problem that some people tend to run into with high repetition sets. From what I've witnessed, they cut the sets short because of the burn, because of the discomfort, but then they never reach that point of true muscular fatigue, which is obviously important from a hypertrophic standpoint. Remember, we need to achieve full motor unit recruitment. We need to make sure that forces are really high on the muscle to simulate fast twitch fibers and whatnot, and that can be a limiting factor. So that's definitely a consideration that I take when prescribing high repetition sets. And generally I'll prescribe high repetition sets through individuals that I know can execute the prescribed RIR, like a true RIR, which is an RIR that I guess is based off a muscle fatigue, true muscle fatigue, not discomfort. It's important to make that to make that distinction between the two.
Do you make that distinction sort of once you know the client, or if you have a general idea about the client, you can generally gauge, okay, do they know how to gauge RIR? Can they generally gauge that? And that's when you sort of make that distinction. And if they're unable to do that, for instance, something like a 15 plus rep bicep curl, you might just say, okay, go if you think they're prone to sort of cutting it short, how would you generally program that?
Well, what I do in most cases for those clients is I just use lower rep ranges. I may even select a load for the client, potentially get them to do like an AMRAP set. So, a load that I know will probably land them in between 10 to 15 repetitions and get them to do as many reps as possible. Especially the clients that don't have a high training frequency. Like if a client's only training 3 times a week, they can probably get away with doing like an AMRAP set on a bicep curl, because at the end of the day, like we mentioned, that's not going to elicit a great amount of fatigue. And even if it does, it's probably not going to interfere greatly with their training due to the large amount of recovery time they have in between sessions. So with a lot of my novice clients, I do implement lower rep range work for most of the exercises until I believe they get to a point, or they've gotten to a point where they can gauge their RIRs quite accurately, and quite accurately on their own, as opposed to training with me face to face, because I'll obviously push my clients to a greater degree than they push themselves on their own. And that's where most of the progress is made, right? When the client's training on their own, especially if you're an online coach, it's literally, or they're on their own all the time. So that's where it also gets quite, I guess, hard to gauge whether or not the client's truly hitting that RIR you're prescribing. And that can also feed into like, deloading, for example. Sometimes a client doesn't accumulate as much fatigue as you think they are, because just because you write a 2 RIR in their program, like we kind of just discussed, doesn't mean they're hitting a true 2 RIR, which means they're not going to be accumulating as much fatigue as you think they will. So this is where reactive deloads, have their place and are important. With a lot of my clients, I do use the reactive deload approach. So it's more of an auto-regulated approach, in which I prescribe a deload when I think is necessary, when I think they've built up enough fatigue to necessitate a deload.
How do you find, because we commonly have, do you find that ranges quite a lot? Like, for instance, I think I was talking with Aaron Hoey, and he was sort of talking about how it's kind of like some people have sort of over-prescribed deloads, also put a little bit too much emphasis on them, and I don't want to sort of misrepresent his point, but it was kind of like in a population that isn't training that hard, you want to kind of be careful of just slamming deloads at them, or pre-planning deloads when they don't necessarily need it. Like, do you find as though that can extend quite a long period, or?
Well, I do think a lot of people probably shortcut themselves by implementing proactive deloads. Consistently implementing proactive deloads. I definitely think for the population that doesn't train very frequently, like let's say 2 to 4 times a week, their need for a deload is obviously reduced, especially when compared to individuals who are training 5 to 6 times a week. And that's why I like the reactive approach, because for my clients who only train 3 times a week, like I will pretty much only deload if they are facing performance decrement. And if you plan a program appropriately, strategically, and implement some type of potentially like, light days, moderate days, and high intensity days, so you're like undulating the intensity, then, sometimes you can go, months without really needing a deload, because a lot of these clients who aren't very experienced can train, and it can train hard consistently, especially if they have, a lot of recovery time in between sessions, and not really face any performance decrement. The importance of deloads increases as you start to train more, as you increase your training frequency, and potentially as you progress throughout your training career as well. So, once you get to that intermediate advanced stage, well, then yes, like it's probably important that you start implementing deloads, potentially a proactive approach if you know that you are acquiring fatigue as the program goes on, like that you're actually hitting your RIRs and you're hitting a true RIR. But like I said, that can, as an online coach, when you've got clients who are kind of doing their own thing, it's hard to actually gauge whether or not they're hitting it. So you kind of have to look for other indications of, a deload, a signs that they need a deload, like performance decrements, for example, unusual, fatigue, and so on. So yeah, man.
Yeah. I think it's intriguing because I think there's a lot of things we see as like, okay, in the optimal environment, this is what we do. But it's kind of like, well, life isn't optimal. Like I look at the way that I'm training right now. I have a program, but I basically just do the same lifts. I literally do the same lifts. I have a 2-day split basically. Twice. I do it train 4 times a week. And I don't even weigh myself in the morning. I weigh myself at night to check if I've eaten enough food. I don't even track my food. Like it's that like step back from tracking anything. And like, I still feel like I'm progressing actually relatively well. And it's literally like, okay, yeah, it's definitely not optimal. I'm not tracking a thing. And basically I'm just focusing on, okay, sleep enough, train 4 times a week, hard enough. Don't shit on yourself in one session. And that's basically the gist of what I'm doing right now. And then when I feel like I want to deload, I'm just going to deload. Because basically university and life and all that, trying to not fail my exams.
It's definitely important to take all those external factors into account, but we have to remember that we deload to dissipate training related fatigue. And there's obviously going to be all these other external factors in your life that may be feeding into your general fatigue, but we have to distinguish between training related fatigue and that general fatigue that we're building up just due to life. And, sometimes people can't distinguish between the two, and because they are excessively fatigued from either sleep deprivation or uni or whatever it is, they kind of call that deload early, but they haven't actually acquired enough training related fatigue to necessitate that deload, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think people commonly, like, how do you go about making sure you don't do that? And when someone is overly life fatigued, how do you go about sort of bringing them back to maintenance volume, or what do you maintenance life volume?
It all comes down to addressing the root cause. Like, we can't just deload because someone is sleep deprived. Like, they have to work on their sleep. They have to, sleep more. So yeah, it's tough, because obviously when we prescribe training programs, we are prescribing all this training stress that is being dropped onto all the other stress that our clients are facing on a day-to-day basis. Which I think a lot of coaches disregard. So
yeah, like I have a client going through his university exams, and he's in med school, and it's like we're kind of trying to tackle that and sort of be like, okay, when you want a light week of training, I'm pretty fine to give it to you. Like, I don't think we're not going to go into a full deload, but it's like, okay, I think it's more important that you pass your exams than like get a little more swole.
And that's when undulating intensities can come in handy. So you don't have to take a full deload, but potentially taking one lighter day can have its benefits. Sometimes, if a client's training 3-4 days a week, I'll have, one light day throughout the week, a moderate day, and then maybe 2 high intensity days. And that can prolong their mesocycle and reduce the need for a deload after 4 weeks, as opposed to them doing 4 high intensity sessions on a consistent basis. And yeah, they probably need a deload more frequently, right? But that can kind of prolong the mesocycle. And I find that's a neat way to plan out a mesocycle for individuals who do have a lot of external stresses that are feeding into their fatigue and potentially interfering with their ability to perform and recover from training.
Do you think, is it generally inappropriate to make nutrition or programming, I don't know why I blanked on that, nutritional programming sort of alterations if life fatigue is high, or do you feel like it has to, generally it should come from just a change of the life fatigue? Or how do you, when life fatigue is high, is it generally okay? Or when would you go about making alterations to nutritional training?
Well, it depends on the client's goals, and we have to remember that the client is never going to be in a perfect situation to make progress. Like, there's always going to be something that's coming up unless they are completely dedicated to their bodybuilding, to their gym, which we don't have many clients who are like that. So, I think nutritional provision is important in those periods, especially if a client's goal is fat loss. And if they're extremely stressed due to uni, due to other factors in their life, well, maybe they shouldn't be trying to lose fat at that point. Like, that's where you kind of have to think critically about the situation and potentially talk to the client and persuade them to take a different route, a route that is more sustainable, a route that is probably more conducive to their current lifestyle. And a maintenance phase in these cases is generally the best way to go about things, not only in regards to nutrition, but sometimes even in regards to training. Some clients during those periods just aren't able to express their strength. They just aren't able to perform to the best of their abilities. So they end up just chasing their tail, pulling volume back, potentially taking their calories to maintenance or into a slight surplus can have greater benefits than trying to push training harder and maybe even trying to push fat loss harder too. Like, there's only so much an individual can take. And there needs to be a point where you as a coach, pull it back at the right time. And, it's obviously a rational decision that you have to make and that you have to kind of persuade the client to agree with and ensure that they actually trust in the process as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of like, well, if you have someone who's got, like, for instance, what would I do for myself if I'm going through all this life stress and it's like, okay, yeah, building muscle takes a long time. So is it really crucial if I go through like a little low volume phase where I basically don't eat that much for like 4 weeks? It's like, probably not a massive deal. So it's like,
I found myself in a very similar situation to you probably 6 weeks ago. So I was training 5 days a week. I just couldn't handle it anymore. Uni was at its peak, work was at its peak. So I pulled back training to 3 to 4 times a week. I gave myself more of a flexible approach to training. So instead of telling myself that I had to do 4 sessions, I just said, 3 to 4. If you can do 4 to 4, if not, just get your 3 sessions in. Instead of, maintaining my caloric surplus, I decided to get into a cut. And considering I had been gaining for a while, the cut wasn't really a drastic change, I guess, in my life. Like, I just reduced calories. I actually felt better after reducing calories because I'd been gaining
gets
for so long.
After a while.
It definitely does, when you're eating 3,000+ calories consistently. So, I pulled back on that and I feel better for it. The past 6 weeks have been great. I've been training consistently. Yeah, it's only been 3-4 times a week, but it's better than trying to train 5 days a week but missing sessions. So that's been a tremendous help. And just being able to adjust expectations during those periods is imperative. Like, so many people just struggle to adjust their expectations, but at the end of the day, there's only so much your body can take at any one time. And pulling back will most likely get you better results than trying to push forward. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I kind of,
that's a conversation that I've had with my clients numerous times. Like
mm,
trying to adjust expectations, especially when you train a diverse range of clients who present with a range of different, lifestyle issues and external factors that can affect their training.
mm.
Yeah, it's super important, man.
Yeah, I think it's quite crucial to. I think it's something JPS has actually done really, really well. Is kind of shed some light on like, hey, as a coach, like you kind of have a responsibility, not just to have your client progress physically. Like it's like it's just you can't be in. I wouldn't say abusive, but you can't be like the word would be. You just had to be a responsible coach and sort of realize that okay, in reality, they're a human being. They are not a robot.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like, well, this person, like optimal doesn't really ever exist. It would be nice if it did, but it just doesn't. So it's like, okay, in reality, what are the things that we can do that actually either push us forward in a physical sort of physique sense, or can we maintain while having life move forward? So it's kind of. Hey guys, thank you very much for listening to this episode. I hope you give us a review or you really enjoyed the episode. Let me know any feedback. I'm always open to any criticism, anything like that. Reach out to me on Instagram at James_Walsham. Or if you'd like to follow my business account, follow at the Hypertrophy Hub. Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. If you would like to help the show, there's a list of ways to do so in the show notes, but if you're wondering how, the best thing to do is just give us a review on iTunes or just let me know how the show can be improved. Thank you very much.